It was a Friday night in the city, the kind where the air feels electric with possibilities. The streets were alive with the usual chaos of the weekend rush. Yellow cabs honking impatiently, groups of friends laughing as they spilled out of bars, and the constant hum of a metropolis that truly never sleeps. I was running late for a friend's birthday celebration downtown, having spent too long deliberating over what to wear. After 3 outfit changes and a minor crisis over whether my hair looked effortlessly tousled or just plain messy, I finally made it out of my apartment and onto the bustling sidewalk. I should probably tell you a bit about myself. I'm not usually the type to get caught up in chance encounters or romantic comedies come to life. I'm pragmatic, a bit reserved, and generally the person in my friend group who plans everything down to the minute. My dating history could best be described as a series of carefully vetted coffee dates that rarely progressed beyond polite conversation. Not for lack of trying, mind you, but there's something about the forced nature of dating apps that never quite clicked for me. I work in graphic design at a mid-sized agency, spend too much time reorganizing my bookshelf by color, and have a cat named Pixel who judges my life choices with impressive consistency. That night, I was wearing my favorite navy button-down, the one that my friend Marco insists brings out my eyes, and jeans that cost more than I'd like to admit. My hair was, indeed, somewhere between stylishly disheveled and I just woke up, but I'd given up on perfection about 20 minutes prior. The birthday party was at some trendy new cocktail bar that had opened in the meatpacking district, the kind with no sign outside and a line that wrapped around the block. Being fashionably late was one thing. Being so late that the birthday boy noticed my absence was another entirely. As I hurried down the street, scanning for an available cab, the sky decided to complicate matters further. What started as a light drizzle quickly transformed into the kind of rain that seems personally offended by your existence. Within seconds, my carefully crafted appearance was thoroughly compromised, and I joined the ranks of desperate New Yorkers frantically waving at any cab with its light on. That's when I saw it. A beacon of hope in the form of a vacant taxi turning the corner. I made a dash for it, my shoes splashing through puddles with reckless abandon. In my tunnel vision pursuit of dry transportation, I failed to notice another figure making the same calculation from the opposite direction. Our hands collided on the door handle, a moment of unexpected contact that sent a surprising jolt up my arm. "Oh, sorry," I said automatically, looking up to see who my competition for the cab was. And that's when time did that cliché thing where it seems to slow down, though I'd never admit that to anyone who wasn't there. He was tall, taller than me by several inches, which is saying something, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. His eyes were the kind of brown that looks almost gold when the light hits them just right, and he had the sort of smile that seemed to suggest he knew something you didn't, but would be happy to let you in on the secret. His coat was expensive, the kind of casual luxury that never tries too hard, and he wore it with the confidence of someone who doesn't think much about how they look because they know they look good. "No need to apologize," he said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the rain. "Couples ride first, isn't that the rule?" I blinked, momentarily thrown by both his words and the way he maintained eye contact a beat longer than was strictly necessary. "I don't think we qualify," I managed to reply, attempting to sound amused rather than flustered. His smile widened. "Not yet, anyway, but the night is young." Before I could formulate a response to that remarkably forward statement, he pulled the door open wider. "Where are you headed?" I hesitated. Every city-dwelling instinct warned against sharing my destination with a stranger, but something about him made me want to throw caution to the rain-soaked wind. "Meatpacking district," I said finally. "Perfect," he replied. "I'm headed to Soho. We're practically neighbors for the next 15 minutes. He gestured to the open cab door with a theatrical flourish. "After you." Let me explain why this moment mattered more than it might seem on the surface. In a city of 8 million people, we're trained to avoid eye contact, to keep our guards up, to treat strangers with polite suspicion. It's a survival mechanism in many ways. But there are rare moments when something breaks through that carefully constructed barrier. A smile, a joke, a shared predicament, and suddenly, you're not just two anonymous figures in the urban landscape. You're people with the potential to connect. That's what happened when our hands touched on that cab door. It wasn't just about the physical contact. It was about the unexpected bridge between two separate lives. I slid into the cab, the leather seat squeaking beneath my wet jeans. He followed, closing the door against the downpour and bringing with him the scent of rain-soaked wool and something citrusy that might have been cologne. The interior of the cab was bathed in that peculiar yellow-orange glow that makes everything look slightly surreal, like we were in a movie rather than a mundane taxi. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a photograph of two young children taped to his dashboard, glanced at us in the rearview mirror. "Where to?" he asked, his accent thick but warm. I gave him the address of the cocktail bar, and my unexpected cabmate added his destination in Soho. The driver nodded, pulled away from the curb, and we were suddenly sharing this small, moving space, our shoulders occasionally brushing as the cab navigated the potholed streets. "So," he said, turning slightly to face me better, "what's in the meatpacking district that's worth braving this biblical deluge?" "Friend's birthday," I replied, suddenly aware of how the rain had transformed my carefully styled hair into something more akin to a wet mop. "At one of those places that probably serves cocktails in something other than glasses, like a shoe or a miniature bathtub." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Ah, the infamous Instagram bait bars. I know them well. Though I have to say, a drink served in a shoe doesn't sound particularly appetizing." "Depends on the shoe, I suppose," I countered, surprising myself with how easily the banter came. "A stiletto might work as a champagne flute in a pinch." "Fair point," he conceded with another laugh. "I'm Alex, by the way." He extended his hand, a formal gesture that seemed charmingly out of place in our damp, cramped quarters. "Jamie," I replied, taking his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, warm despite the chill of the rain. "Nice to meet you, Jamie," Alex said, and the way he said my name made it sound like he'd known it for years. "So, are you fashionably late to this birthday celebration, or desperately late?" I glanced at my watch and winced, edging into the territory of they might have sent out a search party. "Ah, the worst kind of late," he nodded sympathetically. "Though in my experience, the best stories often start with being in the wrong place at the right time. Or in this case, the right cab at the perfect time." The taxi lurched to a stop at a red light, sending us both sliding slightly on the seat. Our shoulders pressed together for a moment, and neither of us moved away immediately. There was something comfortable about the contact, a small point of warmth in the otherwise chilly cab. "What about you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What's in Soho on a rainy Friday night?" "A gallery opening," he replied. "A friend of mine is showing her photography for the first time. It's all black and white studies of city architecture at dawn. Beautiful stuff, but I suspect the free wine is the main draw for half the attendees." "Including you?" I teased. He placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. "I'll have you know I'm a serious art appreciator. The free wine is merely a bonus." His expression softened slightly. "Actually, her work is incredible. She captures these buildings we pass every day, but in a way that makes you see them completely differently. The familiar made strange, and all that." There was something about the way he spoke, with genuine enthusiasm rather than the affected interest people sometimes adopt when trying to impress, that made me want to know more. "That sounds amazing. What's her name? Maybe I've seen her work." "Sophia Chun," he said. "She's just starting to get recognition, but I think she's going to be huge. She has this one series of water towers at sunrise that somehow makes them look like sentinels watching over the city." I shook my head. "I don't know her work, but it sounds like something I'd love to see." "You should come sometime," he said, and then quickly added, "To one of her shows, I mean, if you're interested in photography." The cab driver, who had been silent until now, suddenly chimed in. "Traffic bad ahead. Construction on 9th Avenue. I take different route, okay?" "Fine by me," Alex replied, then looked at me. "As long as it works for you. I don't want to make you any later than you already are." The consideration in his question struck me. It was a small thing, but in a city where people regularly shove past you without a second glance, small courtesies stand out. "It's fine," I assured him. At this point, fashionably late has evolved into dramatically late, so I might as well embrace it. The driver nodded and made a sharp right turn, taking us down a side street lined with restaurants, their windows glowing warmly against the dark, wet night. Inside, I could see people laughing, talking, sharing meals. All these little worlds contained in pools of light. "So, graphic design," Alex said, picking up the conversation. "What kind of work do you do specifically?" I raised an eyebrow. I don't remember mentioning that I'm a designer. A slight flush colored his cheeks. Ah, that might have been an educated guess based on the Adobe shortcuts tattooed on your wrist. I glanced down at my inner wrist, where I did indeed have a small, minimalist tattoo of the Command+Z keys, the universal undo shortcut that had saved my professional life on countless occasions. Good eye, I admitted. Most people think it's some kind of abstract design. My sister's a designer, he explained. She has a similar devotion to keyboard shortcuts, though hers is Command+S after she lost 3 hours of work to a power outage. A classic designer trauma, I nodded solemnly. We all have our horror stories. Mine involved a client presentation and a file that corrupted 5 minutes before I was supposed to show it. What happened? He asked, seeming genuinely interested. I improvised the entire presentation with nothing but my charming personality and vague hand gestures to illustrate concepts, I said, laughing at the memory. Somehow, they still approved the project. The power of confidence, Alex said. It's remarkable what you can achieve when you have no other options. The cab slowed as we approached a particularly congested intersection. Rain continued to streak down the windows, transforming the city lights into blurred constellations. In that moment, the cab felt like a bubble separate from the rest of the world, a temporary shelter where normal rules of stranger interaction were suspended. So, what do you do? I asked, realizing I knew nothing about his professional life. When you're not crashing gallery openings for free wine, that is. I'm in publishing, he replied. I edit nonfiction books, mostly memoirs and biographies. Less glamorous than it sounds, but I get to read some incredible stories before anyone else. That actually sounds fascinating, I said truthfully. Any good ones recently? His face lit up with enthusiasm. I'm working on this amazing memoir by a former deep-sea salvage diver. She spent 20 years recovering artifacts from shipwrecks all over the world. The story she tells about being hundreds of feet underwater in complete darkness, touching pieces of history that no one has seen for centuries. It's incredible. That does sound amazing, I agreed. Though also terrifying. I can barely handle the deep end of a swimming pool. Fear of the unknown depths, he asked. Or just not a fan of water? More like a healthy respect for environments where humans don't naturally belong, I clarified. Space, the deep ocean, places where we're fundamentally out of our element. Interesting perspective, he mused. Though I think that's what draws some people to those environments. The thrill of being somewhere you're not supposed to be, surviving, and even thriving there. Are you one of those people? I asked. Drawn to the places you don't belong? He considered this for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I think I'm more drawn to the stories of those places, the human experience of them, than the physical challenge itself. I'm perfectly content to read about someone else's deep-sea adventures from the safety of my very dry office. The cab driver made another turn, and I realized we were getting closer to my destination. A strange sense of disappointment settled over me at the thought of this conversation ending soon. It had been so long since I'd had an exchange with a stranger that felt this natural, this engaging. What about you? Alex asked. What draws you in, professionally or personally? I like finding the visual solution to a problem, I said after thinking about it. Taking something complicated and making it immediately understandable. There's something satisfying about distilling an idea down to its essence. I paused, then added, personally, I'm drawn to authenticity, I think. People who are genuinely themselves, without pretense. A rare quality in this city, Alex noted. Everyone's performing to some degree, including us. I challenged, meeting his gaze. He held my look for a moment before a slow smile spread across his face. Maybe a little. First impressions and all that. But less than usual, I think. The taxi slowed again, this time pulling toward the curb. We had arrived at my destination. The cocktail bar was visible half a block up, its discreet entrance marked only by a small line of well-dressed people huddled under umbrellas. The rain had lightened to a gentle drizzle, but the sidewalks still glistened under the streetlights. Well, I said, suddenly awkward now that our shared journey was ending. This is me. Alex nodded, something like regret flickering across his features. It was nice sharing a cab with you, Jamie. A fortunate collision of hands. I reached for my wallet, but he shook his head. Please, let me get this. Consider it an apology for making you share your cab. You didn't make me do anything, I pointed out. And we should split it. Your stop is still ahead. How about this, he suggested. I'll cover the cab if you'll let me buy you a coffee sometime. To continue our conversation about the terrifying depths of the ocean and the perfect visual solution. The proposal hung in the air between us, simple yet loaded with possibility. In another context, with another person, I might have politely declined or offered a non-committal response. But something about the last 15 minutes, the ease of our conversation, the genuine interest in his questions, the way he listened to my answers, made me want to say yes. I'd like that, I said finally, surprising myself with how much I meant it. His smile widened, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek that I hadn't noticed before. Great. Can I get your number? We exchanged phones, each entering our contact information. When he handed my phone back, I noticed he had saved himself simply as Alex from the cab. So I don't get confused with all the other Alexes in your life, he explained with a wink. I laughed. Very considerate of you. The cab driver cleared his throat discreetly, reminding us that the meter was still running. I gathered my things and reached for the door handle. Enjoy your friend's birthday, Alex said. I hope the drinks aren't actually served in shoes. Enjoy the gallery opening, I replied. Try not to look too excited about the free wine. With one last smile, I stepped out onto the wet sidewalk. As I closed the door, I heard Alex say through the window, "Remember, couples ride first. It's the rule." Before I could respond, the cab pulled away, merging back into the flow of traffic. I stood there for a moment, watching its taillights disappear around a corner, feeling strangely like I'd just experienced something significant, though I couldn't quite articulate why. The encounter with Alex stayed with me as I made my way to the bar, apologized profusely to the birthday boy, and accepted the teasing from my friends about my disheveled appearance. You look like you got caught in the rain, Marco observed, handing me a cocktail that was, thankfully, served in a normal glass. Something like that, I replied, not quite ready to share the details of my cab ride. It felt private somehow, a small adventure that belonged just to me for now. Throughout the evening, as I caught up with friends and participated in the ritual celebration, my mind kept drifting back to those 15 minutes in the taxi. There was something about the confined space, the ambient sound of rain, and the strange intimacy of sharing a ride with a stranger that had created a perfect environment for connection. In our daily lives, we rarely give ourselves permission to engage so directly with someone new. We're guarded, distracted, or simply too busy to notice the potential for meaningful interaction that surrounds us constantly. What struck me most about Alex wasn't just his obvious charm or good looks, though both were certainly present, but the quality of his attention. In a world where most people are half listening while formulating their next response or checking their phones, his focus had been complete and genuine. He had asked questions because he wanted to know the answers, not just to fill the silence or appear interested. As the night progressed and the birthday celebrations reached their peak, complete with an embarrassing but heartfelt toast from the birthday boy's sister, I found myself checking my phone more often than usual. There was no logical reason to expect a message from Alex so soon, but I couldn't help the small thrill of anticipation each time the screen lit up. It was ridiculous, really, to feel this invested after such a brief encounter. And yet, there was something undeniably compelling about the connection we'd shared. 3 days later, as I was rushing between client meetings in Midtown, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex from the cab. It was simple and direct. Coffee this weekend? I know a place that serves it in actual cups, not shoes. I found myself smiling at my phone like an idiot in the middle of a crowded sidewalk. Actual cups? How disappointingly conventional. But yes, I'd like that, I replied. We arranged to meet that Saturday at a small coffee shop in the West Village, the kind of place that takes its beans seriously but doesn't make you feel like an idiot if you just want a regular latte. I arrived a few minutes early, claiming a small table by the window where I could watch the street. The nervous anticipation I felt was both familiar and strange, the usual first date jitters, but with the added complexity of picking up a conversation that had started in such unusual circumstances. When Alex walked in, he spotted me immediately. His smile was just as I remembered, with that same dimple appearing in his right cheek. He was dressed more casually than he had been on Friday night. Jeans and a simple gray sweater that looked soft enough to touch, which I immediately tried not to think about. No rain today, he observed as he sat down across from me. Might have to find another excuse to share transportation. I'm sure the subway has plenty of romantic potential, I replied dryly. Nothing says connection like being pressed against strangers during rush hour. He laughed. Fair point. Though I think our cab ride was special precisely because it was an exception to the usual urban anonymity. That was exactly it, the exception to the rule, the break in the pattern. In a city where we're trained to keep to ourselves, there was something almost rebellious about that genuine exchange. Our coffee dates stretched into lunch, and then a walk through Washington Square Park, where street musicians provided a soundtrack to our continuing conversation. We talked about books we loved, places we wanted to travel, the strange jobs we'd had before finding our current careers. Alex told me about growing up in a small town in Michigan, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and how moving to New York had been both terrifying and liberating. I shared stories about my large, loud family in Queens, and how I'd never lived more than 10 miles from where I was born, yet still felt like I was discovering new parts of the city all the time. As the afternoon light began to fade, we found ourselves back where we'd started, standing outside the coffee shop where our official first date had begun hours earlier. I should probably get going, I said reluctantly. I promised my sister I'd help her move some furniture tonight. Alex nodded, looking equally reluctant to end our time together. This was nice, he said. Really nice. I'd like to do it again, if you would. I would, I replied, the simplicity of the response belying the warmth that spread through me at the prospect of seeing him again. He stepped closer, his hand lightly touching my arm. Can I kiss you goodbye? He asked, his voice soft but clear. The directness of the question caught me off guard, but in the best possible way. There was no game playing, no ambiguity, just honest desire and respect for my response. I nodded, not trusting my voice in that moment. His lips were soft against mine, the kiss gentle and brief but filled with promise. When he pulled back, his eyes held mine with an intensity that made my heart race. Couples ride first, I said quietly, a smile tugging at my lips. Isn't that the rule? His answering smile was bright enough to rival the streetlights that had just flickered on around us. I think we might qualify now, he replied. As I walked away, heading toward the subway that would take me to my sister's apartment, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange serendipity that had brought us together. If it hadn't rained that night, if either of us had been a minute earlier or later, if we hadn't both reached for the same cab door at the exact same moment, none of this would have happened. Our lives would have continued on their separate tracks, never intersecting, never knowing what might have been. There's something both terrifying and exhilarating about that realization, that so much of what shapes our lives comes down to timing and chance. We like to think we're in control, that we carefully construct our paths through deliberate choices, but the truth is far more chaotic and beautiful. Sometimes, the most meaningful connections emerge from the most random circumstances. In the weeks that followed, Alex and I continued to see each other. We explored hidden corners of the city together, discovered shared passions and fascinating differences, built inside jokes and rituals that became uniquely ours. And every time we hailed a cab together, he would open the door for me with that same mischievous smile and say, "Couples ride first." It became our thing, a private reference to that first rainy night, a reminder of how something as mundane as a taxi ride could become the beginning of something extraordinary. Because that's the thing about life in the city, or maybe life in general. The most meaningful moments often come disguised as ordinary ones. A hand on a door handle, a shared cab ride, a simple comment about couples riding first. These small things contain the potential for connection, for change, for the beginning of a story worth telling. I don't know where this particular story will end. Maybe Alex and I will be one of those couples who tell the cab story at our wedding, embellishing it slightly with each retelling until it achieves the status of personal mythology. Maybe we'll eventually part ways, and this will become a fond memory of a beautiful but temporary connection. Either way, I'm grateful for that rainy night, for that moment of collision, for the courage to say yes to sharing a cab with a stranger who didn't feel like a stranger at all. Because sometimes, the most important journeys begin with the simplest of gestures, reaching for a door, making room for someone else, and discovering that the ride is better when it's shared. Total_char_count, 18,896.